The old clock on the wall showed 5:30 in the morning when Rosa pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the Riverside Concert Hall. Her cleaning cart squeaked as she rolled it across the marble floor, a sound she'd gotten used to over the past 15 years. The building was quiet at this hour, just the way she liked it. No crowds, no noise, just her and the beautiful space she'd grown to love. Rosa was 58 years old, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hands that showed years of hard work. She wore her usual navy blue uniform and kept her graying hair tied back in a simple bun. Most people who saw her probably wouldn't look twice. She was just a cleaning lady after all, someone who emptied the trash bins and mopped the floors. Nothing special, but Rosa had a secret. She loved music more than anything in the world. Every morning as she cleaned, she would hum quietly to herself. Sometimes it was Mozart, sometimes Chopin. Her favorite was Rachmaninoff, though his pieces were so complex that even humming them felt like a small miracle. This particular Tuesday morning, Rosa made her way to the main auditorium. The space always took her breath away, even after all these years. Red velvet seats stretched back in neat rows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, catching the early morning light. And there, in the center of the stage, sat the most beautiful grand piano Rosa had ever seen. Black and glossy like a sleeping giant. She started her work in the back rows, dusting and wiping down the seats one by one. As she worked, she hummed softly. The melody was complicated, full of rises and falls that matched the emotion of the piece. She didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. It had become as natural as breathing. Well, 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 what do we have here? The voice startled Rosa so badly that she nearly dropped her cleaning cloth. She turned to see a man standing in the aisle, watching her with an amused expression. He was probably in his early 40s, wearing expensive clothes that screamed money. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and he carried himself like someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. Rosa recognized him immediately. Everyone who worked at the concert hall knew who he was. This was Derek Ashford, the famous pianist who'd been on the cover of Classical Music Monthly just last week. He was scheduled to rehearse here this morning for his upcoming performance. "I'm sorry, sir," Rosa said quickly, her accent still thick even after 20 years in America. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll move to another section." No, Derek said, walking closer. His shoes clicked loudly against the floor. "Stay right there. I'm curious about something. That tune you were humming. Do you even know what it is?" Rosa felt her cheeks grow warm. "It's Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto," she said quietly. Derek laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "Listen to that. The cleaning lady knows Rachmaninoff." He turned as if addressing an invisible audience. "I suppose everyone thinks they're a music expert these days. YouTube University, right?" Rosa wanted to disappear. She focused on her cleaning, hoping he would just go away and start his rehearsal. But Derek wasn't finished. "Tell me something," he continued, moving even closer. "Have you ever actually touched a piano? Or do you just dust around them and pretend you understand what real musicians do?" By now, a few other people had started arriving. The stage manager, 2 violinists, and a couple of administrative staff who'd come in early. They all stopped when they heard Derek's voice watching the scene unfold. "I've touched a piano before," Rosa said softly, not looking up from her work. "Oh, really?" Derek's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What, you banged on the keys at a shopping mall once? Played chopsticks at a friend's house?" Some of the people watching shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. Rosa's hands were shaking now. She gripped her cleaning cloth tighter, trying to stay calm. She just wanted this conversation to end. "You know what?" Derek said suddenly, as if struck by a brilliant idea. "I'm going to give you an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance." He gestured dramatically toward the stage. "Come up here and play something for me, anything, just a few bars. Let's see if all that humming actually means you know anything about music." "No thank you, sir," Rosa said quickly. "I need to finish my work." "Oh, come on," Derek pressed. "What's the matter? Afraid you'll embarrass yourself?" He looked around at the small crowd that had gathered. "We have witnesses here. Surely you're not going to back down from a simple little challenge." Rosa felt trapped. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. Some looked curious. Others looked sympathetic, as if they felt sorry for her. The stage manager, a woman named Patricia, who'd always been kind to Rosa, started to step forward. "Derek, maybe we should just..." Patricia began. No, I want to see this," Derek interrupted. Come on, Rosa, is it? Just a few notes. Unless all that humming was just pretend. Unless you don't actually know anything about the music you claim to love so much. Something inside Rosa cracked. Maybe it was the mocking tone in his voice. Maybe it was the way he dismissed her so completely, as if her 15 years of listening and learning meant nothing. Maybe it was the shame of being put on the spot in front of all these people. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. A small voice inside her that she'd been ignoring for 20 years. A voice that whispered, "You used to belong on that stage." Rosa set down her cleaning supplies. Her hands were still shaking as she walked toward the stage steps. Each step felt impossibly heavy. The distance from the floor to the stage couldn't have been more than 10 feet, but it felt like climbing a mountain. Behind her, she could hear whispers. Someone said, "This is cruel." Someone else said, "Should we stop this?" But no one did. Derek stood by the piano, a satisfied smile on his face. He clearly expected her to play a few clumsy notes and prove his point. Then he could have a good laugh and get on with his day. Just another story to tell at fancy dinner parties about the time the cleaning lady thought she could play piano. Rosa reached the piano bench and stood there for a long moment. The instrument was even more beautiful up close. The keys seemed to glow in the stage lights. She could smell the wood polish, feel the slight coolness of the air conditioning on her skin. Her hands hovered over the keys. 20 years. It had been 20 years since she'd sat at a piano like this. 20 years since she'd let herself be this vulnerable. 20 years since the night her whole world fell apart. She could still walk away. She could go back to her cleaning cart and her comfortable invisibility. No one would really blame her. Derek was being a bully, and everyone could see that. But Rosa didn't walk away. Instead, she adjusted the bench with a practiced movement that made Derek's eyebrows rise slightly. She sat down, straightened her back, and let her fingers rest gently on the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And then, after 20 years of silence, Rosa began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, filling the entire auditorium with sound. Rosa's fingers moved to the second note, then the third. She was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano. But she wasn't just playing it. She was breathing life into it. In the audience, Derek's smug smile began to fade. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. The notes weren't clumsy or hesitant. They flowed like water, each one perfectly placed, perfectly timed. His eyes narrowed as he watched her hands move across the keys with impossible grace. Rosa kept her eyes closed. She didn't want to see their faces. Didn't want to see Derek's reaction or the surprised looks of the people watching. Right now, there was only the music. The piano felt familiar under her hands, like greeting an old friend after years apart. Her muscles remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The melody grew stronger. Rosa's fingers danced across the keys, moving from the gentle opening into the more complex middle section. Her left hand carried the bass notes while her right hand wove the delicate melody on top. It was like having a conversation with yourself, two voices speaking at once but somehow making perfect sense together. More people had gathered now. The violinists who'd been setting up their music stands stopped what they were doing. A cellist who'd just arrived stood frozen in the doorway, his instrument case still in his hand. Even the security guard, an older man named Harold who usually stayed in his booth, had come to see what was happening. Patricia, the stage manager, felt tears spring to her eyes. She'd worked in this concert hall for 12 years and had heard countless performances. But there was something different about this, something raw and honest that you couldn't learn from any music school. This was someone who truly understood what the composer had been trying to say. The music built to its emotional peak. Rosa's hands moved faster now, the notes tumbling over each other like water rushing over stones. Her whole body swayed slightly with the rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something break open. A door she'd kept locked for 20 years was finally opening, and all the emotions she'd buried came flooding out through her fingertips. Derek stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest, but his expression had completely changed. The mockery was gone. Now he looked confused, almost uncomfortable. This cleaning lady, this woman he'd been making fun of just minutes ago, was playing better than half the pianists he'd heard at conservatories. Better than some of the professionals he'd shared stages with. The music began to slow, moving into the final section. This part was even more beautiful than the beginning, if that was possible. Rosa played it with such tenderness that several people in the audience found themselves holding their breath. Each note seemed to hang in the air for just a moment before the next one arrived, and then with one final soft chord, it was over. The last note faded into silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that Rosa could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked down at her hands on the keys. They were trembling now, but not from nervousness. From something else. Something that felt like grief and joy mixed together. Then the applause started. It began with Patricia, who was openly crying now and spread through the small crowd. Harold, the security guard, was clapping so hard his face had turned red. The cellist in the doorway set down his case just so he could applaud properly. Even the two violinists, who were usually pretty hard to impress, were clapping enthusiastically. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky. She felt like she might fall over. The room seemed to spin slightly, and she had to grip the edge of the piano to steady herself. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Patricia asked, walking toward the stage. Her voice was soft, full of wonder and concern. Rosa opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain? Where would she even start? The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, running down her cheeks. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be crying in front of all these people. Derek hadn't moved from his spot near the piano. He was staring at Rosa like he was seeing her for the first time. He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "That was exceptional. I don't understand. How does a cleaning lady play like that?" Rosa flinched at the term cleaning lady, though she knew he didn't mean it cruelly this time. He was genuinely confused. They all were. She could see it in their faces, the questions they wanted to ask. By now, even more people had arrived. The concert hall's director, a woman named Helen Chen, had come out of her office after hearing the commotion. She stood at the back of the auditorium, her hand over her mouth in surprise. "Rosa," Patricia said gently, climbing the steps to the stage. "Please talk to us. That kind of talent doesn't come from nowhere." Rosa looked around at all the faces watching her. These people had worked alongside her for years. They'd said good morning in the hallways, chatted about the weather, complained about difficult musicians and demanding schedules, but they didn't really know her. How could they? She'd made sure of that. "I used to play," Rosa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago. Used to play?" Derek repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. "That's not something you used to do. That's years of training. Decades, probably. That's the kind of playing that comes from a lifetime of dedication." Rosa felt her chest tighten. The walls she'd built around her past were crumbling, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what would happen when they fell completely. Helen Chen walked down the aisle toward the stage. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she was approaching something fragile that might break. "Rosa," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I've been director of this concert hall for 8 years. In that time, I've heard some of the world's greatest pianists perform on that stage. What you just played was as good as any of them. Better than most, actually." Rosa shook her head. "No, You're not just anything," Helen interrupted firmly. "I need you to tell us the truth. Who are you, really?" The question hung in the air. Who was she really? Rosa wasn't even sure anymore. She'd spent so many years being invisible, being nobody, that she'd almost convinced herself that was all she ever was. But the piano had reminded her. Those few minutes of playing had torn away the disguise she'd been wearing for 20 years. "My name isn't really Rosa Santos," she said quietly. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a foreign language she'd almost forgotten. "I mean, it is now, legally, but I was born with a different name in a different country." Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting. Even Derek had the decency to stay quiet. "I was born in Poland," Rosa continued, her accent growing thicker as emotion overtook her. "My birth name was Rosa Kowalski, and before I came to America, before I started cleaning floors and emptying trash bins, I was a concert pianist." The gasps that followed were almost comical. Patricia's mouth fell open. Harold looked like someone had just told him the earth was flat. Even Helen, who prided herself on never being surprised, couldn't hide her shock. Derek took a step closer to the stage. "Wait, Rosa Kowalski. That name sounds familiar. Did you ever compete internationally?" Rosa nodded slowly. "I won second place at the International Chopin Piano Competition when I was 23 years old." The silence that followed was deafening. The International Chopin Competition was one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. Winners became instant celebrities in the classical music world. Their careers were made overnight. But that was... Derek did the math quickly in his head. That would have been over 30 years ago. You would have been famous. What happened? Why are you here working as a cleaning lady? Rosa's tears were flowing freely now. She couldn't stop them even if she wanted to. Because I lost everything, she said simply. And I've been hiding ever since. Helen Chen moved quickly, her heels clicking against the stage floor. Everyone, please give us some space, she said firmly but kindly. Rosa needs a moment. She turned to Patricia. Could you bring some water, please? The small crowd began to disperse reluctantly, though Rosa could see them whispering to each other as they left. Only Helen, Patricia, and surprisingly Derek remained. He hadn't moved from his spot by the piano, watching Rosa with an expression she couldn't quite read. Patricia returned with a bottle of water and a box of tissues. Rosa accepted both gratefully, taking a long drink and trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were still shaking. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching this happen to someone else. You don't have to tell us anything, Helen said gently, sitting down in one of the front row seats. But if you want to talk, we're listening. Rosa looked at the piano behind her, then back at the three people waiting patiently. For 15 years, she'd kept this secret locked away. She'd convinced herself it was easier that way. Safer. But now that the door had opened, she found she couldn't close it again. Maybe she didn't want to. I grew up in Warsaw, Rosa began, her voice still shaky. My father was a music teacher, nothing fancy, just piano lessons in our apartment. But he could tell I had a gift. By the time I was 5, I was playing pieces that teenagers struggled with. By 7, I was performing in local competitions. She paused, remembering those early days. The excitement of her first performance. Her father's proud smile from the audience. Her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair before each recital. When I was 10, I got accepted to the Friedrich Chopin University of Music. It's one of the most prestigious music schools in Europe. Most students don't get in until they're teenagers, but they made an exception for me. Rosa twisted the water bottle in her hands. That's when everything changed. Derek pulled up a chair, listening intently now. The arrogance from earlier had completely vanished. The training was intense, Rosa continued. 6 hours of practice every day, sometimes more. Music theory, performance technique, composition. I loved it at first. Music was everything to me. But as I got older, the pressure grew. Every performance had to be perfect. Every competition was life or death. Patricia sat down next to Helen, both women completely absorbed in Rosa's story. By the time I was 16, I was performing in concert halls across Europe. Paris, Vienna, Berlin, London, places I'd only dreamed about visiting. And then came the Chopin competition when I was 23. It happens every 5 years in Warsaw, and it's one of the biggest honors a pianist can achieve. You came in second, Derek said quietly. That's incredible. Rosa gave a sad smile. Second place felt like failure to some people, my manager especially. She took another sip of water, her throat tight. I met him when I was 20. His name was Tomasz. He was 10 years older, very charming, very ambitious. He saw potential in me, not just as a pianist, but as a brand. Within a year, we were married. Helen leaned forward, concern evident on her face. At first, it was good, Rosa said. He got me better performances, bigger venues, more money. But slowly, things changed. The practice sessions got longer. 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes 12. He would stand over me, counting every mistake, demanding perfection. If I wanted to take a day off, he'd say I was being lazy, that I was wasting my talent. The auditorium was completely silent except for Rosa's voice. When I was 30, I got pregnant with our daughter. I was so happy. I thought maybe we could slow down a little, that I could take some time to be a mother. Rosa's voice cracked, but Tomasz saw it as an inconvenience. He had already booked performances for the next year. He said I could take 2 months off after the baby was born. Then we'd get back to work. Patricia reached out and squeezed Rosa's hand. Rosa squeezed back, grateful for the support. Our daughter Natalia was born healthy and beautiful. Those first few years were the hardest of my life. I was trying to be a mother and a concert pianist at the same time. Tomasz hired nannies, but I barely saw my own child. I was always traveling, always performing, always exhausted. Rosa stood up, needing to move. She walked to the edge of the stage, looking out at the empty seats. And then came Vienna. I was 35 years old, performing at the Musikverein. It's one of the most famous concert halls in the world. The pressure was enormous. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. Natalia was 5 years old and had been crying on the phone that morning, begging me to come home. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I walked onto that stage, sat at the piano, and began to play Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, one of the most difficult pieces ever written. I made it through the first movement perfectly. The audience was loving it. And then in the middle of the second movement, my hands just stopped. Derek inhaled sharply. They froze, Rosa continued, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I couldn't move my fingers. I couldn't remember what came next. My heart was racing so fast I thought I was dying. I just sat there in front of 2,000 people, unable to play a single note. A panic attack, Helen said softly. Rosa nodded. That's what the doctor said later. Complete mental and physical breakdown from stress and exhaustion. But the damage was done. The reviews the next day were brutal. Kowalski collapses under pressure. Is the Polish prodigy past her prime? One critic wrote that I had embarrassed my country. Patricia made a sound of disgust. That's horrible. Concerts started getting canceled, Rosa went on. Promoters didn't want to take the risk that I might freeze up again. Tomasz was furious. He said I'd destroyed everything we'd built, that I was weak, that I'd let everyone down. She turned back to face them, tears streaming down her face. The worst part came 6 months later. Tomasz filed for divorce and sued for full custody of Natalia. He told the court I was mentally unstable, that I'd had a breakdown in front of thousands of people, that I couldn't be trusted to care for a child. Rosa's voice broke completely, and the judge agreed with him. Helen stood up, her own eyes wet with tears. Rosa, I'm so sorry. I lost my daughter, Rosa said, the words coming out in gasps between sobs. She was only 5 years old, and I lost her. Tomasz got full custody. I was allowed supervised visits twice a month, but he made it so difficult. He moved to a different city, then to a different country. After a year, the visits just stopped. He changed their phone number. I sent letters, but they came back unopened. Derek had his head in his hands. Patricia was crying openly now. So I ran away, Rosa continued. I couldn't stay in Poland. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. The failed pianist who'd had a breakdown. I changed my name to Rosa Santos, came to America, and decided to disappear. I couldn't perform anymore. Every time I even thought about sitting at a piano, I'd start shaking. But I couldn't leave music completely either. So you got a job at a concert hall? Helen said. I could be close to music without the pressure, Rosa explained. I could listen to others play and remember what it felt like to love music, not fear it. For 15 years, I've cleaned these floors and listened to performances and told myself I was content. She looked at Derek, then at Helen and Patricia. But I wasn't content. I was hiding. I was surviving, not living. And maybe deep down I was hoping that one day I'd find the courage to play again. The silence that followed Rosa's story felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Nobody seemed to know what to say. How do you respond to something like that? What words could possibly be enough? Derek was the first to move. He stood up slowly and walked toward the stage, his expensive shoes echoing in the quiet auditorium. When he reached Rosa, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He took her hand gently in both of his. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. I'm so incredibly sorry. Not just for this morning, though that was unforgivable. I'm sorry for what happened to you. For what that man did to you. For the critics who tore you apart instead of seeing that you were struggling. For all of it. Rosa looked down at their joined hands, too overwhelmed to speak. What I did this morning, Derek continued, challenging you like that, mocking you, it was cruel and stupid and arrogant. I thought I was better than you because of who I am, what I've achieved. But the truth is, you've lived through things I can't even imagine. You've lost everything and you kept going. That takes more courage than I've ever had to show. He released her hand and stepped back. I know an apology isn't enough, but I want to make this right somehow. Helen stood up and joined them on the stage. Rosa, I have so many questions, but the most important one is this. Why didn't you ever tell us? Any of us? Rosa wiped her eyes with the tissue Patricia had given her. Because I was ashamed. And scared. Every time I thought about telling someone, I'd remember Vienna. The freezing up. The failure. I couldn't bear to see that disappointment in people's eyes again. But you played beautifully just now, Patricia said, climbing onto the stage as well. There was no freezing, no fear, just incredible music. I don't know how I did it, Rosa admitted. Maybe it was anger at being challenged. Maybe after 15 years the fear finally wore off. Or maybe, she paused, looking at the piano. Maybe I just needed to stop running from it. Helen paced back and forth, her mind clearly working through something. She'd been director of the Riverside Concert Hall long enough to know that what happened this morning was special. Rare. The kind of thing that didn't come along very often. Rosa, Helen said carefully, I want to propose something, but please feel free to say no. There's absolutely no pressure. Rosa tensed, slightly unsure of what was coming. In 6 weeks, we're hosting a benefit concert for the Arts Education Foundation. It's a fundraiser to provide music lessons and instruments for underprivileged children who want to study music. Helen's eyes were bright with an idea that was forming. What if you performed? No, Rosa said immediately, shaking her head. I can't. I haven't performed in 20 years. What I did this morning was a few minutes. A full concert is different. The pressure of the audience, I can't. What if you weren't alone? Derek said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. What if we performed together, a duet? That way, if you freeze up or feel overwhelmed, I'm right there with you. Rosa stared at him, shocked. Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything. Maybe I owe it to myself, Derek said quietly. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old. I've won competitions, performed at Carnegie Hall, made recordings that sold thousands of copies. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started playing in the first place. I became obsessed with being the best, with being recognized, with proving myself. He sat down on the piano bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. This morning, when you played, I heard something I haven't heard in a long time. Maybe something I've never really heard. You weren't playing to impress anyone or prove anything. You were playing because the music needed to come out. That's what music is supposed to be about. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. He's right, Rosa. And think about what the concert supports. Children who want to learn music but can't afford it. Kids who might have the same gift you had but need someone to give them a chance. Isn't that worth facing your fear? Rosa felt torn. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, the part that had just rediscovered the joy of playing after so many years. But another part, the part that remembered Vienna and the breakdown and losing everything, that part wanted to run away and never touch a piano again. I don't know, she said honestly. It's been so long. My technique probably isn't what it used to be. I'd need to practice for hours every day. And I still have my job here, my cleaning responsibilities. Helen waved her hand dismissively. We can work around that. In fact, I have an idea about that too. She smiled warmly at Rosa. What if we gave you access to our practice rooms? We have 3 smaller studios that are rarely used during early morning hours. You could practice before your shift or after or whenever you want. No charge, no restrictions. And I could help you prepare, Derek added. Not as a teacher, I don't mean that. But as a fellow musician, we could work through the piece together, help each other. Rosa looked at each of them in turn. Helen with her hopeful expression, Patricia with tears still on her cheeks, Derek with genuine humility in his eyes. They all believed in her. They all thought she could do this. What would we even play? Rosa asked, and she could hear in her own voice that she was actually considering it. Derek thought for a moment. What about Schubert's Fantasia in F minor? It's written for 4 hands on 1 piano. It's challenging but beautiful, and it requires 2 pianists to work together perfectly. Neither person can do it alone. Rosa knew the piece well. She'd played it once, years ago, with another pianist at a competition in Prague. It was gorgeous and emotional and, yes, very challenging. I'd need time to think about it, she said slowly. Of course, Helen said quickly.
Take all the time you need.
But Rosa, regardless of whether you decide to perform or not, I want you to know that the practice rooms are yours. You deserve to play, to reconnect with your gift, even if it's just for yourself. At that moment, another person entered the auditorium. It was Vincent Zhao, the concert hall's resident music director and conductor. He was a small man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a kind face. He'd been in a meeting and had missed the whole morning's drama. What's going on? Vincent asked, looking at the group assembled on stage. Patricia sent me an urgent text saying I needed to get here immediately. Patricia grinned. Vincent, you're not going to believe this. Rosa just played Chopin's Nocturne, and it turns out she's actually Rosa Kowalski, who won second place at the International Chopin competition 30 years ago. Vincent's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. Rosa Kowalski? The Rosa Kowalski? He walked quickly down the aisle toward the stage. But that means you studied under Professor Wojciech Nowak at the Warsaw Conservatory. He was my teacher 2 years later. Rosa felt a jolt of recognition. You studied with Professor Nowak? For 3 years, Vincent said, climbing onto the stage. He talked about you sometimes, said you were the most naturally gifted student he'd ever taught. He was heartbroken when you disappeared from the concert circuit. Nobody knew what happened to you. Fresh tears sprang to Rosa's eyes. Professor Nowak had been like a father to her during her years at the conservatory. He'd been patient and encouraging, never pushing too hard. She'd often wondered what he thought when everything fell apart. He passed away 5 years ago, Vincent said gently, seeing the question in her eyes. But he never stopped believing in you. He used to say that real talent never dies, it just waits for the right moment to return. Rosa put her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. Vincent turned to Helen. If Rosa is considering performing again, I want to help. I'll adjust rehearsal schedules, make sure she has whatever resources she needs. This is important, Derek smiled. It seems like the universe is trying to tell you something, Rosa. Rosa looked around at all these people, some she'd worked with for years, others she'd just met properly today. They were all here, supporting her, believing in her, giving her a chance she never thought she'd have again. Okay, she said quietly, and then louder. Okay, I'll do it. I'll perform at the benefit concert. The reaction was immediate. Patricia let out a little cheer. Helen clasped her hands together in delight. Vincent nodded approvingly, and Derek broke into a genuine smile, the first real smile Rosa had seen from him all morning. But I have one condition, Rosa added, looking directly at Derek. We practice together, and we're equals. No star pianist and his accompanist partners. Derek extended his hand. Partners, he agreed, and when they shook hands, Rosa felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was courage. Or maybe it was just the feeling of finally coming home to the person she used to be. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights. Rosa would arrive at the concert hall at 5 in the morning, just like always. But now, instead of going straight to her cleaning cart, she'd head to practice room C. The small space had become her sanctuary, a place where she could reconnect with the music she'd lost so long ago. At first, her hands had been stiff. Muscle memory only went so far after 20 years. There were moments of frustration when her fingers wouldn't move the way she remembered, when passages that used to be easy now felt impossible. But slowly, day by day, it started coming back. Derek kept his word. 3 times a week, he'd join her in the practice room, and they'd work on the Schubert piece together. Rosa had been nervous at first, worried that he'd revert to his old arrogant self. But he never did. He was patient, encouraging, and genuinely excited about their partnership. You're adding too much emotion to that section, he'd say, not critically but thoughtfully. Let the notes speak for themselves there. Or Rosa would stop him and say, no, you're rushing. This part needs to breathe. Feel the pause between the phrases. They learned from each other, challenged each other, and somewhere along the way became real friends. Vincent would stop by sometimes, listening from the doorway. He never interrupted, just smiled and nodded approvingly. Once, Rosa caught him wiping tears from his eyes during a particularly beautiful passage. Word spread quickly through the classical music community. Rosa Kowalski, the pianist who disappeared 20 years ago, was performing again. A few journalists tried to contact the concert hall for interviews, but Helen politely turned them all away. This isn't about publicity, she told them firmly. This is about a woman reclaiming her gift. But Rosa was working on something else too, something she hadn't told anyone about. Late at night, after Derek went home and the concert hall was empty, except for Harold making his security rounds, Rosa would return to practice room C. She'd been composing her own piece, the first original work she'd ever created. She called it Znaleziona, which meant found again in Polish. It was a 10-minute solo piece that told her entire story without words. The opening was dark and chaotic, representing Vienna and the breakdown. The middle section was quiet and sad, like the years of hiding and loss. But the final section built to something hopeful and powerful, a celebration of rediscovery and second chances. The night before the benefit concert, Rosa couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What if she froze again? What if she let everyone down? What if the audience hated her performance? The old fears came creeping back, whispering their doubts. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went to the concert hall. Harold let her in with a knowing smile. "Thought you might show up," he said. "Good luck tomorrow, Rosa. We're all proud of you." She sat at the piano in practice room C and played through her original composition one more time. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt the fear slowly melt away. This was who she was. This was what she was meant to do. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it. The day of the concert arrived. The Riverside Concert Hall was completely sold out. Over 1,000 people filled the seats, all there to support music education for underprivileged children. Some had come because they'd heard rumors about Rosa's return. Others were just regular supporters of the Arts Education Foundation. But everyone could feel that something special was about to happen. Backstage, Rosa stood in front of a mirror, barely recognizing herself. Instead of her cleaning uniform, she wore a simple but elegant black dress that Patricia had helped her pick out. Her hair was styled nicely and she wore a little makeup, but her hands were shaking. Derek found her in the green room, pacing back and forth. "Hey," he said softly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm terrified," Rosa admitted. "What if I freeze like I did in Vienna? What if my hands stop working? What if—" "Rosa," Derek interrupted gently, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Look at me. You've been practicing for 6 weeks. You know this piece backwards and forwards. And more importantly, you're not the same person you were in Vienna. You're stronger now. You've survived things that would have destroyed most people. But what if, and even if something goes wrong," Derek continued, "I'll be right there beside you. We're partners, remember? We'll get through it together." Rosa took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I can do this." The concert began with several other performances. A string quartet played Beethoven. A young violinist performed a solo piece. Each act was wonderful, but everyone in the audience was waiting for what came next. Finally, Helen walked onto the stage to introduce them. "Our final performance tonight is very special," she said into the microphone. "We have 2 extraordinary pianists who will perform Schubert's Fantasia in F minor. Please welcome Derek Ashford and Rosa Kowalski." The applause was thunderous. Rosa and Derek walked onto the stage together. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, which Rosa found comforting. They sat side by side at the piano bench, Derek on the left, Rosa on the right. They looked at each other, sharing a moment of silent understanding. Then together they began to play. The music filled the concert hall, 2 sets of hands working in perfect harmony. Derek's part provided the foundation while Rosa's part wove melody on top. Then they'd switch, Rosa taking the bass while Derek played the treble. It was like a conversation, 2 voices speaking as one. Rosa felt herself getting lost in the music just like she had that first morning 6 weeks ago. There was no Vienna, no breakdown, no fear. Just the pure joy of creating something beautiful with another person. The piece built to its emotional climax, both of them playing with increasing intensity. The audience sat in complete silence, transfixed. Even the ushers had stopped moving, watching from the back of the hall, and then with one final powerful chord it was over. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then the entire audience rose to their feet, applauding so loudly that Rosa could feel it in her chest. People were cheering, some were crying. The standing ovation went on for what felt like forever. Rosa and Derek stood and took a bow together. As they did, Rosa scanned the audience and her heart nearly stopped. There, sitting in the 3rd row, was a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes that Rosa would recognize anywhere. Natalia, her daughter. Rosa's legs felt weak. Derek noticed and steadied her. "Are you okay?" he whispered. "That's my daughter," Rosa whispered back, tears streaming down her face. "In the 3rd row, that's Natalia." Derek followed her gaze and squeezed her hand supportively. Helen came back on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, Rosa has one more surprise for us tonight. An original composition she's been working on. This is its world premiere." Rosa walked to the microphone, her voice shaking as she spoke. This piece is called Znaleziona, which means found again. It's about losing yourself and finding your way back home. She sat alone at the piano this time. The audience settled back into their seats, waiting. Rosa placed her hands on the keys and began to play her story. The dark opening represented all the pain and loss. The quiet middle section captured the years of hiding and loneliness. But the final section, the section she'd written just last week, was filled with hope and joy and gratitude. It was about second chances and forgiveness and the courage to start over. When the last note faded, Rosa opened her eyes. The applause was even louder than before, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on Natalia, who was standing and clapping with tears running down her face. After the concert, Rosa stood backstage, surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. But she was watching the door, waiting. And then Natalia appeared and time seemed to stop. They stood facing each other, two strangers who were also mother and daughter. Natalia was 28 now, a grown woman, but Rosa could still see the 5-year-old girl she'd lost. Mama, Natalia said, the Polish word for mother. It was the first word she'd spoken to Rosa in over 20 years. Rosa couldn't speak. She just opened her arms and Natalia walked into them. They held each other and cried. 20 years of separation and pain flowing out in tears of reunion. I saw the concert announcement online, Natalia said when they finally pulled apart. I recognized your name, your maiden name. I had to come. I had to see if it was really you. I tried to find you, Rosa said, her voice breaking. I sent so many letters. I called so many times. I know, Natalia said softly. I found the letters last year when my father was moving. He'd kept them all hidden in a box. When I confronted him about it, he finally told me the truth. About the custody battle, about the lies he told. He's old now, sick. I think he finally felt guilty about what he did. They talked for hours that night, catching up on 20 lost years. Natalia was a teacher now, married with a son of her own. She lived in Boston, just a few hours away from Rosa's city. I want you to meet your grandson, Natalia said. His name is Thomas and he's 5 years old. The same age I was when we were separated. Rosa started crying again, overwhelmed with joy. The next morning, Rosa returned to the concert hall for her cleaning shift. Some things didn't need to change. She still loved this place, still found peace in the early morning quiet. But now she also had practice sessions to look forward to. Helen had offered her a position as a piano instructor for the children's music program, teaching on weekends while keeping her cleaning job during the week. Derek stopped by that morning to say goodbye before leaving for his next tour. Thank you, he said simply. You reminded me why music matters. I won't forget that. As Rosa pushed her cleaning cart down the familiar hallways, she hummed softly to herself. But this time it wasn't a sad sound. It was joyful, hopeful. She had found her way back to music, back to her daughter, back to herself. The concert hall had a new plaque installed by the stage piano. It read, "Music has the power to find us again, no matter how lost we become." Every time Rosa saw it, she smiled. She had been lost for 20 years, but now finally she was found.